So the talk is called Songs of Solitude, Telling More Story with Less. It's an attempt to define narrative minimalism as it's used in games, look at some examples, and then try and provide some tools for you to take back for your own projects should you decide that this is an avenue that you're interested in pursuing. To quote the Rolling Stones, Sympathy for the Devil, please allow me to introduce myself. You know what? No. It's February 14th. The hell with the Rolling Stones. Happy Van Halentine's Day. Okay, now seriously. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is CJ Kirshner. I am a writer, I'm a game developer. I run a small studio about 100 miles west of here called Polyhedron Productions. We're a independent script writing consultancy, and then we do some internal development as well. I've been in the industry since about 2001, but I've been doing writing for games specifically since about 2007, 2008, so this is 10 years now. I got my start down in New York City at Chaos Studios working on Homefront, the game where the US and North Korea got into a war. Who's laughing now about that? And then I moved to Montreal, where I stayed for a number of years with Ubisoft, worked on a bunch of their major titles, got a really interesting overview of just what a massive game-making organization looks like. The thing that I always said when I walked into, they have this huge red brick 5-story shirt factory in Montreal's Mile End, and there are more people that work in that office that live in the town where I grew up. It's crazy. So it was really exciting to have 20 projects going on at once, and your team size is 600 at that site alone, and then God knows how many thousands more across the world. It's very easy to get lost in that sort of environment, and to get very specialized. And I wanted to remain more general. So in 2015, I left to start my own studio, which is again about 100 miles. Oh, that was loud. What was that? About 100 miles west of here. It's called Polyhedron, and it's been really, really great because basically it allows me to mix up the kinds of projects that I work on. So there's AAA stuff, there's independent stuff. I've gotten the opportunity to travel all over the world to places that if you told me 5 years ago that I would be there, I would have told you were crazy. Russia, for example, or Saudi Arabia, and then again, get to work on a lot of really interesting titles, and then develop some stuff of our own, which hopefully we'll have more information about in the coming months. We'll see. So that's sort of the who I am and what I've done, but it doesn't really answer the question of why this topic, why solitude and narrative minimalism. And to get into that, I'm gonna drop all the slides and stuff and just get real for a second. When I left Montreal, I went through an enormously painful breakup, and I moved back to the town that I grew up in, which is really lovely when it's not minus 20 degrees out and buried under snow. But it definitely felt like wandering into the wilderness after 10 years between New York and Montreal. I left a lot of my friends behind in both of those cities, and I was feeling very isolated. Now this talk originally started coming together, I'd say November of 2016, and Last Guardian was finally coming out that December. And I really, really have enjoyed that studio's games throughout their time making them. So I started replaying Shadow of the Colossus to sort of prepare myself for the latest oeuvre. And I ended up writing a 20-page shot-by-shot film analysis of the introductory cutscene as a way to keep myself from losing my mind, though I think you could probably reasonably argue that if you were writing a 20-page essay about a 4-minute cutscene, you've already lost it. So I'm not looking for sympathy, I'm just sort of trying to give you a sense of where my head was at when I started thinking about games that emphasize both feelings of loneliness and use these techniques of narrative minimalism. They tend to be very expressionist, right? They're concerned about feelings more than, say, realistic representation. They tend to be emotionally engaging. They look to a broader spectrum of your feelings than your typical action game, which is targeting either the adrenaline rush or the dopamine drop. And they're memorable, right? These are games that we are still talking about decades after their release. In fact, Shadow of the Colossus just got re-released last week. I was going to be able to say yesterday if this meeting had happened last week, but it's all good. It's still close enough in time that, like, this is, I mean, it's enough of an event that people still get excited about it.
Does the game bring in the snow? I'll explain that.
I don't know, but it's sold, like, not the regular edition, the special edition was pre-order only, and I'm kicking myself because I didn't realize that. I couldn't have pre-ordered it anyway, I was in the country, but like, I want one, and now I can't get one unless I go to eBay. I'll be damned if I pay what they're charging me. So anyway, the games are memorable. These are experiences that stay with us for long after we've played them, put the disc on the shelf, and traded it in. What is narrative minimalism? This was the question that I set out to try and, I'm sure there are established definitions, but I had a heck of a time finding them. So this was the question that I really wanted to explore before I figured out how to apply it to these certain games and how to apply it to my own work. And I don't really use it a lot in my own work. But what is it? I kept coming back to this Potter Stewart quote. He was a Chief Justice for the Supreme Court, and this was actually about hardcore pornography, but it seems like the sort of easiest go-to, which he says, "I shall not attempt to further define the kinds of material, but I know it when I see it," right? Like, we've said that before. I can't really say what it is, but I know when I see it. Can't get up here and give you a talk about I know it when I see it. That's bullshit, I'm sorry. So I started trying to define the areas around narrative minimalism to see what would sort of be left in the negative space. I looked at minimalism in design, in mechanics design. This is where my speaker notes are really useful because I've got a quote from a white paper written by a number of designers and academics. It's still available. I think it's called Towards a Minimalism in Game Design. It's by Andy Nealon, who is a professor at NYU Polytechnic, I believe, Adam Saltzman, who was one of the creators of Cannibalt, and I'm blanking on the third. Eddie Boxman, who was the guy who made Osmos. And basically, it's the idea that there is sort of a limited play space, a limited number of rule sets, but through that small area, you get what emerges is very, very deep and repeatable play. It's dynamic, it's different every time. And I think that the games that are sort of highlights of that work. You know, the rules of Tetris are simple, like blocks fall, you turn them, fit them together, they disappear. Play that thing forever. So I looked at maximalism in narrative as another sort of space to sort of carve out of what narrative minimalism isn't. And this maximalism is the philosophy of excess, right? And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I love all of the games that are up here. But one of them is really, really lore dense. One of them has long cutscenes, not nearly as long as some other games that appear on this platform, but it interrupts the action every once in a while to give you 30 to 45 seconds to 2 minutes of cinematic. And then one of them just has people shouting at you all the time to get on the gun, get in the truck, throw a grenade in the hole, open the door, do whatever. So they're very, there's very little quiet time here. Again, not a bad thing, but definitely the opposite end of minimalism. So I know it when I play it, it's still not good enough. What am I playing? What am I looking at here? So obviously there's no dialogue. There's no cutscenes. It's an indie art house game, and that's it. Done. There's minimalism. That's not it. The ribbon on the chain, that's what I keep banging into my watch. Okay. There's a pop, I can't. The definition I came up with is narrative minimalism reduces plot and exposition to basic forms, yet retains a high degree of, I'm trying to read this backwards, and that's not working, descriptive and or suggestive power. I feel like that's a pretty good definition of the sort of thing that a lot of the games that I go to for this achieve. Every game has constraints in its development, whether they're budgetary, whether they're technical, whether it is just ran out of time. That's usually the budget. But this is less of a constraint of like, we can't tell all of this story, and it's more an intention that we choose not to tell every piece of the story. It's the idea of design by subtraction. The other idea is that you utilize implicit versus explicit narrative. You leave a lot of gaps and people fill them in themselves. So I looked at 6 games that I thought exemplified this definition, these tenets. And I really tried to look across the entire spectrum of stuff that I played, stuff that I enjoy. There's probably a lot of other examples out there. I'm totally open to suggestions if you think there's something I have missed, something I haven't played. Just thinking about Icy. Thank you for that, by the way.
It's not a very minimalistic game.
Is it really talky? Oh, I saw there was a narrator, so I'm guessing there's a bit of narrator.
It is very wordy.
But like I said, it's not a hard and fast rule that there's no cutscenes and no dialogue.
Right.
So we'll look at all of these in depth. I did probably way deeper than I intended to. Not quite the 25-page. Actually, it's only 20 the last time I mentioned it. So it's like a long film analysis of Sherlock Holmes. I haven't done that for all of these yet. My mind is still somewhat intact. But I did definitely start to identify common elements, and I really just wanted to say that so I could put in a periodic table joke. But they do have things in common. They're all strongly focused on isolation. There's this idea of derelict spaces. There is this sense of wonder. There is, can't read that one backwards, companionship. I've got a pane of glass. I don't have my speaker's notes, but like if that can, it's not saving me, it's actually doing more harm than good. And then the last aspect is transformation. That's obviously the periodic table symbol for Autobotium, I believe, or Unobtainium, Decepticonium. So looking at the first one, isolation. The isolation in those 6 games tended to manifest itself in 3 different forms. There's the isolation from others, from the self, and then from the environment. And so how does that actually work? In terms of isolation from others, there is a strong focus on the player's journey, and not necessarily the player characters, the player person holding the controller. This is largely a solitary experience. There's a small cast of characters, maybe, if it's not just you. There's the player character, there's the companion ally character, there is a possible antagonist, there isn't always, and then there's usually a limited set of obstacles, enemies, things you have to overcome. The stuff that we normally put in front of the player to make them keep playing the game. So again, these are not experiences where you're getting a lot of cross chatter from your fire team, or where you're sharing the screen with an ensemble cast of characters. These are games about you and maybe something else in a big world. But who are you? And here's where the isolation from the self part comes in. These 4 characters, do you know what they have in common? Anyone want to venture a guess?
Okay.
Good. That's sharp. Yes. So they're never explicitly named. At no point while you're playing Inside or Portal will they say, "Hey, your name here, actually that's exactly what they say in Portland, but they're never, nobody addresses you. Nobody gives you a name. When you don't name something, we say naming things gives them power, gives us power over them. Doesn't happen here. Again, it doesn't mean that they don't have names. The names are things that are either buried in interviews or marketing or the manual or that fans have sussed out or code hacked. So we know they have names. We know that the character in Journey is called the Traveler. That's Wander. That's subject name here. No, okay, it's shut. You must be the pride of subject hometown here.
It's also worth noting, Wander in the Japanese title is called Wander's Journey, not Shadow of the Colossus.
This is also true. It is. It's Wander in the Colossus, I think. It's not Wander's Journey.
No, it's right. It's Wander in the Colossus.
It's Wander in the Colossus, which is again, they just dropped the character's name out of the English title. Shadow of the Colossus is actually it's pretty evocative too. Kid from Inside actually doesn't have a name. Toby. Congratulations, Toby. And then in terms of isolation from the environment, these games tend to play out in these vast and typically desolate spaces of which your character, your avatar, is the smallest part. There's a lot of just walking or just moving through space, exercising the most basic unit of agency that a game can provide. And that can give a sense of both isolation and loneliness, this scale of magnitude and grandeur. It can also create a sense of foreboding. It can create a very, very distinct sense of menace, or it can kind of combine to do all of those at once, which I think is a really good encapsulation here. So, a lot of the games have derelict spaces. And when I was putting it all together, I'm like, oh, there's ruins, right? There's ancient ruins. They're not all ancient ruins, though, and that's where I landed on the term derelict spaces, because there's this idea of decay, and it happens to the architecture, it happens to the cultures that were there previously, the people, and then to the machines that are sort of left behind when all of the rest of it has fallen apart. It's not as simple as like slap down, Chichen Itza here, and you've got narrative minimalism. So looking at all of that in more depth, again, perhaps the lack of other characters is a technical constraint or design, or like you've clearly got an animator and a modeler, but if you've only got one, that person's time is super limited, and you focus all of the energy on the thing that gives you the most payoff. And maybe throwing in a crowd of characters like in a game like Assassin's Creed is not going to get you the best payoff. So a lot of these spaces tend to feel very abandoned. The people aren't there, but they leave evidence of their presence, of their passing. Obviously, the Ratman rooms in Portal are one of the go-tos for like environmental narrative about somebody has been here before you, has left things, clues, potentially for you to find. Maybe they just did it because they were losing their mind. Actually, this doesn't deal with mental degradation, but maybe it should. And then this one in particular from Journey is one of the first, like the graffiti thing, right? You scribble on the walls, and that's become basically a joke in video games. That people are leaving these long conversations on a truck stop bathroom wall in the middle of the zombie apocalypse, no. But in terms of environmental storytelling, this one I like particularly because you find it, and then you think back to the thing that you just walked through to get there, and suddenly you realize, oh, that's where I just walked through a graveyard. I sort of got that, but it could have been anything. It was just kind of very new, and I'm exploring the space, and now I have an understanding of what that space's function is.
Wait, that was a graveyard?
I'm pretty sure that by combining, that is a bunch of the dead, Journey progenitor people, and then they all have a little stone, and then you walk through there.
That never clicked.
What can I say, Seth? I mean, that's an interpretation. The other, we'll get to the interpretation part. That's my interpretation. I think it's correct, but I'm sure it's been confirmed somewhere in an art book or an interview. Sometimes, like, it's players that get to leave. I love this stuff in Dark Souls where people are like, "Hey, watch out!" They're like, "Why?" And the rocks fall on you and you die. Really, really good environmental storytelling, actually. And then, again, there's the idea of the crumbling architecture and the ruins and the derelict. Again, this one's pretty on the nose from Monument Valley, but it says it pretty well. Now all that remains are monuments stripped of their glories. And again, you see this as a common element through a lot of these games. I mean, there's the iconic first proper stage of Journey with the bridge. There is the temple in Shadow of the Colossus, and then this one always, for me, requires the greatest suspension of disbelief. Yes, it is suspension of disbelief, because again, it's an element that a lot of these games have in common, that you're like, okay, wait a minute, so the people are all gone, the place is falling apart, but all of the machinery still works. Why? How? Again, potential constraints, potentially gameplay, but like, what these do, in addition to providing really useful gating and puzzle mechanisms for player progression, is they add a sense of dynamism to what might otherwise be a largely static environment. They give you movement, they give you something that just catches the eye. And to be fair, like, a lot of this stuff that we have made as a species will probably be around long after we die. There's a name for it, it's the Anthropocene era. And like, it's really, really weird when you start, here's a tangent that was not included in this talk. I was recently driving to Key West. There's a long highway that goes from southern tip of Florida all the way out to the islands. And they obviously were recently hit pretty hard, the Middle Keys especially, by Hurricane Irma. And so there are still massive piles of debris and trees and houses down on the side of the road. But there's other stuff, buoys and like bits of plastic bottles and mangroves that are hundreds of yards off the road. You think, okay, they'll clean up the houses, they'll clean up the trees, they'll probably at some point clean out the canals. But a lot of that little stuff, that's never getting picked up. That's 1 million, 2 million, 10 million years from now, that's going into a geological layer, right? There's going to be dinosaur bones, pirate treasure, Coke Zero. That's who we are. It's not a judgment call, it's just we have changed the planet. And so, yeah, a lot of this stuff will be around long after we're not. And I think that's a really interesting point to contemplate in the games. So sense of wonder, you've got this sort of foundation of solitude. You've got the second tier of vast environment, and then you end up with this point with the pyramid, inverted pyramid of mystery. These games all feel like discovery. And that's kind of, you are the first person who's seen this in however long, whether it's fiction, whether it's maybe the first person who's seen it because you got the disc and put it in. It's the first time you, the player, are playing it. It meshes well with where the character's mindset is. So in a lot of scripted AAA games, which I've made, we have these things called wow moments. I remember very distinctly being in meetings with an executive who said, okay, that's great, where's my wow moment? And usually the wow moment is something spectacular, blowing up, falling down. You've taken the player's perspective, if it is indeed a first-person perspective game. Actually, they do this in third-person games as well. And you frame it exactly how you want it. So you make sure they're not missing it. I take issue with the terminology wow moment because it kind of implies that the rest of the moments are not wow. And they should be. And again, I think that's where these games tend to stand apart, right? They propose a lot of questions. This is the J.J. Abrams mystery box. style of storytelling, unlike J.J. Abrams' mystery boxes, there usually is a payoff for it. Sorry, I lost. But it encourages players to start looking in the nooks and crannies or decompiling the code, which is crazy because you want to know what's going on. You're not just explicitly told all the time, here's what you need to know to understand what you're doing. So the action is where the wow moment is the thing that normally punctuates even greater action. Here, it's the sense of questioning is dyed into the fabric of the game, right? The questions are the thing that kind of drive you on. And I got the term sense of wonder, and I would have a quote from I'm going to try and remember it. But basically, Rachel Carson was an environmentalist. She was a writer. One of the reasons that we have an environmental protection agency, or had, I think we still have it, I don't know. She wrote this book called Silent Spring, and she did write another called Sense of Wonder. Sense of Wonder is a lot more intimate and sort of personal than Silent Spring, and she has this thing where she says it is good and natural to be out in the world around nature. And don't remember the exact quote. I would have it in front of me, but Google. I mean, it's not crucial. The idea is that by being out in that vast space and kind of on your own, you gain a different appreciation of it than you might otherwise. This is the fourth element that I wanted to talk about, and it's companionship. And it feels weird to talk about companionship when I got a talk called Songs of Solitude. Like, why is somebody else butting into my experience now? Where is this companion coming from? And it's because the companion provides contrast. You can't know what it's like to be alone unless you've been around others. Like, if you have lived entirely alone your entire life, you don't even have a definition for alone. That's just the normal way of things. So by being around others, you can appreciate time to yourself. And when you've had enough time to yourself, you find some people to share with. So it's the idea that absence makes the heart grow fonder. And again, triggering or targeting that wider emotional spectrum. Generally not a sentiment that I think you're going to find in your first-person shooters. Absence of enemies makes you go, okay, wait, did I finish this area? Did I break a trigger? Like, what's going on? So yeah, all of these games have a companion character. Now here's the interesting thing. A lot of these companion characters tend to be non-human, if they are even animate objects at all within the companion cube. Now, one of the reasons behind this, or one of the reasons that I suspect is behind this, whether knowingly or unknowingly, actually, in the case of the companion cube, I remember there was a developer commentary note that sort of led into this investigation, but in the I think it was 50s through 70s, there were a lot of studies conducted on both for just weird 50s shits and giggles, and then also for prisoners who spend a lot of time in solitary confinement. And they found that when you take basically everything away from a person, the few things that they have, they cling to real hard. Not only do they cling to them, they start to anthropomorphize them. They assign them human qualities. They have conversations with their pillows. It's obviously incredibly not a cool thing to do to somebody. If you're in the case of prison, it's traumatic. I think there was some that they were looking at for long-term space flight as well, where somebody would just be out of communication with everybody for a long period of time. Those people were a little weird. But again, it's one of the reasons why you imprint so strongly on a horse that doesn't talk, a cube that doesn't talk and cannot talk, and if it does start talking, you put it in the incinerator. I don't know what totem is, the other person in the journey that you could beat back, and then you get a bit more range and flexibility when you have somebody jump into your Dark Souls game, assuming they don't try and murder you outright, but like, yeah, your methods of communication there are still pretty limited. But you feel like, oh my God, there's somebody here now. I'm not totally by myself. And it's one of the reasons I cried when this man lost a volleyball. Like, it was a heartbreaking, I didn't see it drifting off the wall. Wilson now actually makes Wilson. It's weird. The commercial. And then lastly, the fifth element that a lot of these games have in common is the idea of transformation. So I said that it was about the player's journey, the person holding the controller, but the player character usually goes through a journey as well. And it tends to end in one of two ways. You're either enlightened, you reach the end, or you are destroyed. And there is the term apotheosis, which Journey literally takes for their last song on the soundtrack, and then kenosis, which we'll get to in just a second, because I'm remembering what my notes say. So, in the sense of enlightenment, right? This is you have reached the top of the mountain. You have gotten to the light. You have done everything that you've needed to do. And apotheosis, I believe the literal translation is to turn into a god. So this is also like in something like Monument Valley, where you find forgiveness for all of the birds that you scorned when you were their bird princess king, something. But again, there's the idea of elevating your personhood to a level beyond. Kenosis is actually a term that I found from Vidius Valens, who was, I believe, a 2nd century Greek astrologer. And it's not dying. It's not death. It is being drained of life. It is having your life force sucked out of your body. And again, I think that was a pretty appropriate term for the ending that, like, a good number of these characters face. Wander, obviously. There is an option in Dark Souls where you can sort of use your own life forces to sustain the fires that you find around the world. Interestingly enough, in half of the examples, you literally turn into a monster. Sorry if you haven't played Inside, it's a bit of a spoiler, but like actual monstrosity. Monsterhood. No sound. This is the clip from GLaDOS going, okay, well I think we can put our differences behind us for science. You monster. Curses. So case studies are really interesting. I like doing them. I find them fascinating. But like, what are the things that we can do to take away and bring to our own projects? If again, maybe you're not making a narratively minimalistic game. I've never made a narrative. I love them, and I would love to try and make one, but it's just not generally the sort of thing that I get the opportunity to do. So I want to try and find things that I could do within the projects that I've got.
Is this also supposed to be?
Oh, right, no, I was going to give you the formula. For here's what you do, right? To make a great game, it's a big epic world map, you add some runs, you add some cryptic hieroglyphs, you take out most of your dialogue, and then you add a cute companion character. And then you take the companion character away. You do this, you just follow this formula, guaranteed game of the year. Done. Easy, right? 3-act structure, don't worry about it, just follow, no, and then you can bring the companion character back, because we're not fucking monsters, we're human, like and the truth is, actually, I don't know what the formula for making a game of the year is. I don't even know what the formula for necessarily making a great narratively minimalistic game is. Sometimes it feels like these things are capturing lightning in a bottle, right? Like, if the Shadow of the Colossus that just came out, this is weird, I couldn't make this reference the last time. If the Shadow of the Colossus that came out last week were the first of the games, right? It came out on the PS4. I don't know if it would have had the same impact that it had when it came out on the PS2. People were still weird. We were figuring things out, and we're always figuring things out. But, so a lot of it is the time that the game is released, the team that you've got, the intentions. But I think it's important to recognize that narrative, storytelling is, especially in game development, is a team sport. And I owe Raina Anderson credit for that little turn of phrase. I'm sure it's been used elsewhere, but she's the one I got it from. She's got a really good GEC talk. I think it's available free on the Vault. But this is something that doesn't just involve writers, it involves your designers and your audio people and your directors and your programmers, and certainly the audio and casting, even though there isn't a whole lot of dialogue, and your producers. Actually, producers are crucial here. Just because you're taking out a lot of your explicit story doesn't mean the game is going to take less time to make. In many cases, it takes more time because you have to iterate and remove things and figure out if it still all holds together. There's a reason that Last Guardian was 9 years in the making. I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons, but certainly the exploratory and the subtractive design is more time consuming than just throwing stuff in. You get feature creep, you scope back. You start with an already minimal set of features and then you dial back. At some point it's gonna break and they're gonna have to move forward a little bit, and it's the opposite process. I also kind of want to take a second to demolish the idea of the auteur theory. And this is a really, really convenient thing for marketing purposes. And it's a really, really easy way to talk about a lot of these games, right? You know, we think about Journey, Shadow of the Colossus, a little less so inside Dark Souls. Portal, I think there's a bit more of a team vibe there, but usually there is a visionary, right, creator this is the brainchild. And that's not entirely untrue. They may have been the genesis of the idea, but there is a team supporting them, even though they get the lion's share of credit. And I think it's crucial to recognize that these things don't happen by the effort of just one person unless you are a one-person studio. And again, that's still pretty rare. And I think of this moment in the first BioShock. This is Fort Frolic. BioShock is generally regarded as sort of the baby of Kennedy. I wish I had the video. I don't. The movement, there's music rising, the way that the set is decorated, all comes together to form this incredible moment that may have been guided, but was not built entirely by one person. And there was this is drawn in the notes that I don't have in front of me. There's a Lao Tzu quote that says, "When the master governs, people are hardly aware that he's there," and that's sinister as hell. So scrub that. There's another one from a filmmaker, and it was drawing a total blank on it now. Sorry about this. Basically, it's the director is there to present a vision that a clear and coherent vision that everyone contributes to. Everyone is excited to contribute to. And I think that's a problem with what I'm trying to get at here is that you can be the director, but just make sure that the input of everybody that you're working with is still heard, valued. I mean, you can't execute on all of it, but the other thing that I think is really, really useful to take away from all of this is give the player context. Build enough understanding of why they're doing things other than just shouting, "You need to do this thing," to make them want to do it, to give them a reason to push forward. So here's the formula for actually what is a good game. A great game is clear goal and emotional investment. That's it. If you can nail that, can't guarantee you a game of the year, but I'll put you in for strong contention. And I looked at the examples again. They all have a clear goal and an emotional investment. Journey's goal, walk to the mountain. Shadow of the Colossus is just defeat 16 colossi. Inside's goal is simply keep walking to the right.
Or swim.
Or swim, sometimes swim. There's some weird sections in the middle there. Don't worry about those. Mayum Valleys it's a puzzle, it's a Polly Pocket. Figure out the way to get to the exit. Portal's goal. Solve this puzzle. And then kill everything. And again, all of those goals map very clearly to the emotional components that the game then evokes. Journey is the literal hero's journey. It follows the ups and downs of the monolith of your traditional sort of 3-act structure. This one is pretty obvious. Like, again, spoilers if you haven't played Shadow of the Colossus, but like you're not a good person. You're doing the right thing. You're doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. So there's a growing sense of guilt. This one again, like the screen cutoff here. And this is a fascinating example of just like when you've got this much screen space, you kind of want to know what's over here if your only job is to walk in that direction. This one's the joy of discovery. It's touching things. It's figuring out the perspective and tapping and unfolding. The growing mastery, watching friends of mine who had not played games get the whole momentum puzzles in Portal and then seeing them doing the thing where they're shooting out holes at high speed. Amazing. It's well structured that way too. They took a lot of time to set up all of the tutorials and challenges and to make sure that you understood a concept before you were presented it in a sort of higher stakes environment, and then you really got a hang of it. And then this one is just frustration and triumph, killing everything, except you're going to get killed a lot yourself, and it's just, you want to go back out there and pick your souls up and kill whoever killed you. So to that end, I recommend you reduce tutorials. Our players are a lot smarter than we give them credit for, but we still load them down with the like, okay, left stick moves, right stick looks. And to be fair, that is important. It's a band-aid on a bigger problem, which is that people just don't inherently understand game controllers, twin stick controls specifically. Like one you use the camera, one's the legs. I don't normally need to worry about that when I'm a human being, but another good way to put it is a flute has 16 buttons, and I think an Xbox controller has 17, and you wouldn't hand somebody a flute and go, just figure it out. Or like, press that button, you don't know what is the G note to G. Where's G? I've never held this thing before, where's G? I think Journey did a really good job here where it's just like, you know the thing you're holding, and it's like tilt, and then you do it, and you try it, and it does a thing. And like the input and the output are pretty well mapped. You can make jokes about reducing your tutorials, but it's still a tutorial. Like that doesn't fix the problem. They did it in Portal, and it was good, where it was like, okay, press space to say apple, and you jump, and then they make fun of you for it. And that was actually pretty good. Leave out information. Create gaps in your story, right? Like you don't need to do it all the time. Albert Einstein, God, there was a really good quote. I should print these things out next time, shouldn't I? Basically, he's got a long-winded phrase, much more scientific than what actually got reported, which was, everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I think that's a good target to try and hit with both your game concept, your controls, your story, your character design, especially character design. That's my segue for. Think about how effective silhouettes are at conveying information. Like, you already know, just based on the first look, there are 2 characters up here who don't belong in this lineup. So if you can figure out a way to do that with your story, with your mechanics, do it. Hemingway had a quote that I have in front of me. Basically, he says, if a writer is writing about something and he's writing about it truly enough and the writer understands it, then the reader will get a sense of it as though the writer had stated it. The short actual paraphrase of that is like inferences, I think, are way more powerful than explanations. And they engage the players, the audience, the reader's imaginations a lot more than being told what something means. Let them figure it out for themselves. This one I think I'm going to remember pretty well. Amy Hennig at Comic-Con 2011 said, like, if you explain everything, you killed it. It's a collaboration. Games are a collaboration between us, developers, and players. And it's that relationship that we sometimes lose sight of, the fact of like, yeah, we have basically a hot wire to this person's emotional and imagination sectors of the brain. They're also a part of this process. We involve them. So here's the quick rundown of all of them. Narrative is a team sport. You present a clear, coherent vision that everybody gets to be a part of. You give the player context, which means the easily understood objectives free from having to tell them what to do all the time. Go to the mountain. Okay. Sometimes it doesn't work out that well. I told my friend to go to the mountain and they just beelined right there. There's a thing off to the side where you collect the first bit of scarf, walk right by it. So you said go to the mountain. Okay, I did. You're right. I took for granted that you understood the signposting. Go back from the mountain a little bit and then take a detour and then go to the mountain. Reduce your tutorials because players are starting to get credit for it. Leave out information because, again, when you do that, the spaces that are unfilled, players get to fill in themselves. It's really cool. And they'll do it. They'll go crazy. Go to any game wiki and look at the amount of detail that people have put in on their own, unpaid, because they liked the thing. Great. For Homefront, there's a whole list of people digging out the references that I snuck in there for 1138 is clearly a reference to THX and maybe some Star Wars. Good for you. I mean, that's an obvious one, but there's some other ones. It's just all right. And then here's the formula for making what I think is a key game, narratively minimalist, expressive, engaging, memorable. Love, mystery, a little bit of magic. Keep those three things in mind. I think it'll be pretty good. I'm going to leave you with one quote. I'm pretty sure I can do this one from memory. It's Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. He was the author of The Little Prince. And he wrote, it's widely quoted, it's from his book, Night Flight. You know that you've achieved perfection, not when there's nothing left to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. So I encourage you to strip as much out as you can and see what you're left with, and hopefully it'll be great when you're done. And I look forward to playing it. And then just here's a picture of it. Oh no, that's mine. Thank you. It's the best way to get in touch with me because I'm not on social media. Shoot me an email. Love to have a conversation. Love to be told I'm wrong. Love to be enlightened about some games that I might have missed or possibly have all of my life force sucked out of me by the internet. It's apotheosis and kenosis, bring it back around. And then here's a picture of a polar bear that I once mistakenly thought was a dog. Now I just have to put it in all of my talks because I can't put it down. So, cool. Thank you.
Any questions?
I was going to say, I don't know if there's normally a question and answer thing after this, but I'm happy to take
We
it.
have still. We have to come until 9, so.
I can't tell time. Oh, wow.
If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, it is general legal impact until we're out of this room. So.
Okay, whoa, we got one.
Have you played Dominique T?
Have I played what?
Dominique T?
I have not. I've never, I don't know if I've heard of it before. What is it?
It just recently released on Steam, but it is actually a super old RPG Maker game. It is probably minimalistic to the extreme about a girl that explores her dreams, and that's it.
Okay. That sounds like it could be up my alley. I'm currently fighting with my computer to get it running again.
Alright, far more popular than, how about Metroid Prime and any sort of Metroid series?
Yeah, I had played the Metroid games, but I hadn't played them in depth because, fun story. When I was growing up, my mother swore there would never be a Nintendo in our house. And sure enough, I wasn't allowed to have consoles. I didn't have a SNES or a Genesis or an Atari or any of that stuff. They were somehow okay with PC games, but I don't know, that line got drawn. So I didn't actually get when I was 15, I went around my small town collecting bottles and cans out of garbage cans, and I bought myself a PlayStation, and I got so excited, and I brought it home, and I was like, oh shit. So I took it back, unopened, to EB, back when EB Games was still around. And I didn't actually get my first console until I was in college. So I didn't get a chance to play the Metroid stuff. Because that was a GameCube?
Metroid Prime was GameCube.
Yeah, so I got
Metroid
a
series.
360 my senior year in college, because that was when I could afford to do it. Don't go to college in New York City. Actually do, but don't.
I guess I'm just curious.
No, but I know that it does, like, there's a lot of like visor scanning stuff. That tends to be how you get a lot of information about the world that you're in.
Right, but there's no real characters to talk to. In that
Right. But it's also, Metroid's kind of an odd example because so a lot of these are not necessarily installments in an established franchise or a pre-existing universe. So I was recently playing Breath of the Wild with a friend of mine who is I don't like the term fanboy, but he was a devotee of the Zelda series. He knew all of the lore that is not in that game. So on first inspection, I would reasonably call Breath of the Wild like a narrative and minimalistic experience, but there is actually that wealth of narrative lore, reams of it, the fan wiki stuff that is out there. And again, I think that's because it falls as like the ninth or actually I'm trying to imagine this shelf, and there's like at least 25 or 30 Zelda games over the course of all of it. So like Metroid is, yeah, I will have to go back and check the comments, but I know what you mean. Like there's no characters necessarily. They don't really give you a whole lot of setup for like dropping into this big open space and like you sort of go play around it. I'm gonna go with Greg, right?
Yeah. I was. Do you find any commonalities between the games in terms of color palettes or sound?
Interesting. That's a question that I don't have the right answer for. I haven't, I looked mostly at narrative and some general aesthetics, but like I hadn't gone into a deep dive on presentation. I know that Journey did do an entire color map of their book levels and story, and it sort of maps from like the warm golds to the cold blue section in the middle, and then to the sort of white enlightened part. That sounds racist when I say it out loud, but the snowy hardships, and then the enlightenment of the mountain. Luminous, I suppose, is the. I don't know if that's common though. I'm thinking about inside. Inside's kind of a bouillabaisse of gray. It's just like fish eggs in oil. Shadow of the Colossus is mostly pretty verdant and stony. Like the two main textures that I would identify there are like grass and old sort of stones. And the idea there is mostly you're in an untouched valley. It's been banned from going there, so largely nature has reclaimed it. What else we have? Monument Valley, pretty much across the board. And that's part of that. I think the emotional key that I said for that one was joy of discovery, and it's like every one of those is different, right? It's like I opened the pop-up book and suddenly I've got an entirely different. They tend to stick with mostly like pastels for that one, but they use a pretty broad range of colors. And then Portal's got a pretty codified industrial aesthetic. Does it change much? Yeah, it does, but it's only because, after she tried, spoiler alert, Portal ends with the computer trying to kill you. You get to see into the Gussa facility. So it goes from the clean, glistening white Apple store to sort of what Apple stores would look like in 500 years from now. Potentially, I don't know, maybe Apple stores will be the one thing that survives the apocalypse. So, color palette, I'd say everyone, there isn't necessarily a strong commonality there. And then audio, I'd say there's actually there could be the commonality that I would identify there would be there's a lot of not necessarily silence, but there's lots of quiet time. There's lots of like really low level ambient, maybe not music, but there's light sound effects. I mean, Shadow of the Colossus is mostly the sound of the wind. Portal, when glass isn't insulting you, is the hum of like force fields. Inside has got that sort of machine hum as well. If you hear anything in Dark Souls, you should probably run away from it. Yeah, it's good though. I'd want to investigate that further because I hadn't considered the soundscapes as they are a part of the story. They're a part of the world. They're part of the narrative. As I mentioned, it's all encompassing. But that's not one that I focused on. That's one I should take a look at. We go with Ku.
Dark Souls has, I think, a kind of infamously difficult to absorb story, where some people say, you know, I had to go to the wiki after playing the games, I just didn't understand.
Still don't know what it's necessarily about. But
Do you think that's a failure of minimalistic storytelling, or do you think that's intentional?
That's a tough question because do I think it's a failure of minimalistic storytelling? I can find things to be critical about in all of those games, and I love them all, but my heart is black and withered and like shriveled up, and I'm curmudgeonly in some ways. I don't think it is a failure. I think that again, if you are creating a story that has big holes in it and leaving them for people to fill in, there are some people that aren't going to fill them in. That's just the in terms of your spectrum of player types. Some people will take it all at face value. Some people will go that additional step and dig. Do I necessarily think that's a failure? I'm reluctant to call that a failure. Mostly because, you know, normally if somebody says something is wrong, they're right. Like if something doesn't feel good in a game, then it's the designer's fault, generally. If they tell you to fix it, they're wrong. I mean, my hope would be that even if they didn't necessarily have all of the pieces for themselves to assemble what they thought, I would hope they still enjoyed the experience, even if they couldn't come up with a totally coherent narrative for it. I mean, this is a thing that human brains try and do, right? Dreams and just talking about your day. You try and take a seemingly disconnected sequence of events and string it together in a way that makes sense. And we get frustrated when there are bits that don't fit in. I don't think that's a failure. Like I love Inside. I think it's a phenomenally well-made game. Story doesn't make sense. There's a submarine section in the middle of it for virtually no reason. It's fun. Doesn't fit with the bit that came before or the bit that came after. I don't think that's a failure on their part. I think that, like, in terms of that one, the plot, like the sequence of events is less important than that. Again, that sense of discovery, like what's on the right side of the screen. Well, shit, there's a sub here. I don't know why. I get that I'm in kind of a facility. I guess they've got subs instead of, I don't know, buses like normal evil corporations, but so I don't necessarily know if it's a failure if, I mean, they can still go to the wiki. There were those players that did figure it out or were willing to start translating interviews or digging into weird XML files on a disk. So they could theoretically fill in bits of it. If there's nothing to fill in, and again, when I sort of took a dig at Lost, I think that was kind of a failure where it's like, okay, I was given this puzzle box and a bunch of pieces to put into it, and they don't all fit, and there's no way to make them fit, and it feels like the creator doesn't really care if they fit. They've just sort of they close the lid, and there's I want the polar bears back. I want to know I don't care about the fight between good and evil. Just tell me more about the zoo part. Yeah.
What's the Albert Einstein quote that's supposed to be, if you cannot explain it to an elementary student, they don't understand it well enough?
No, but that's a good quote too. No, it was this really long. Again, you have the laptop that has the speaker notes on it. Why don't you just sit to the slide and tell us what it is? It's a thing about quantums and data and like infinitesimalisms, and there's a reason that I can't quote it.
Unfortunately, this is not Photoshop or PowerPoint.
Is it?
It's the PowerPoint viewer.
I would dig. Hold on, I will try and dig it up, and then you will all say, "Oh no, you're totally justified in not memorizing that thing." Einstein, because the thing that he gets attributed to is it was a music journalist's paraphrase of something that he heard. Simple quote. There we go.
What's this?
Thank you, Internet. Okay, hold on one moment.
Nope, that is not what I wanted.
Okay, here it is. The original quote is, "It can scarcely be denied that the supreme goal of all theory is to make the irreducible basic elements as simple and as few as possible without having to surrender the adequate representation of a single datum of experience."
Darn, that was not.
Everything should be as simple as possible, but not simpler, is a very good soundbite way to sum up what I think he was getting at there. That's the reason, yeah. That's cool. Yes.
I understand that you haven't played as many older NES games as such due to your mom.
The coda on that story that I didn't get to tell was I came back one Christmas and she bought a Wii. And I went, all right, fine.
But so, I was curious about, this may or may not have been intentional narrative minimalism in like classic games due to like the technology at the time, or just even like cutscenes hadn't been invented yet, or something like that. But I'm curious about it because like there was recently this article about Streets of Rage 2 on Kotaku. It was about like how this game had like in the entire game there's like 2 cutscenes,
right?
But they create this entire world in the levels. It's this bizarre like future of US where like people have like blood sport on the like, subterranean like baseball field, like things like this, like really weird stuff going on, but it's all, there's no like text explaining it. You're just like,
right.
It gets weirder and weirder as you go through the game, but there's no but there are plenty of characters you're beating up, and you can also play it, co-op if you want. But I'm just thinking about that aspect of like narrative minimalism. Also, like I think like Super Mario Brothers 2, for me, like when I was playing as a kid, like the instruction manual was like where you got the narrative, but beyond that, you had to just sort of infer like what is going on in this bizarre world.
Well, and 2 is the outlier.
Yeah.
Siri. I mean, so there was a bit in there. Oh, hey, thank you. Perfect. Yeah, it's wholesome and necessary thing for us to turn to the end of the earth. And then I love that quote. And then our beauty is to know the sense of wonder and humility. And then it is not half so important to know as to feel is like a really good summation of like what it means to make a game that is more concerned about expressions than realistic skin shakers. So in terms of the
I didn't mean to digress.
No, there was a slide earlier on about intent versus constraint, and I think a lot of the earlier games were definitely more on the constraint side. I don't think they were setting out to necessarily say, hey, listen, let's strip out as much of the story as we can. I think it was like, here's what we can fit into 16K of memory. One bookend at the front and one bookend at the back. It's not a fair comparison because it was, I mean, it's sort of fair. It's for the Apple II time. But like Prince of Persia does a decent, there's weird things Edward Said in Orientalism and how you depict other cultures.
This is like the old Prince of
The original Prince of Persia has that scene at the beginning that tells you literally everything that you need to know to play for the next 3-4 hours. And then it just gets out of your way and lets you do it. And there is, and as you said, actually the manuals, I miss manuals. If I can find games that still print them, I'll do it, because that used to be the place where you could put stuff like this. It's something that, while it's great that we've stopped printing them from the sort of wasteful environmental perspective, but it's definitely like, it's kind of robbed us of the tool. Like, manuals got really boring. Like, it was like, okay, there'd be story and controls and credits and like your warranty information, sign up for Nintendo Power, whatever else. Like, they were hearty, and then it was just kind of controls, basic gameplay information, and then it just stopped being all of that. And it's like weird legal disclaimers in French and English, and you're like, okay, well, I don't miss them anymore because they've been, I'm sure that they've been focus tested out of existence. I think you can get away with a lot in terms of minimizing your narrative if you do like a lot of abstract representation, your graphics, your sound, your mechanics, and then you just offload as much of it as you want to the players, as much as you can to the player's imagination. I think that Streets of Rage is also probably one of those examples where I'm like, it's a product of the time that it was made and the technology that it was made for. Like, you could not get away with making Streets of Rage, releasing it on Steam now, right? The game is what? If you're really good at it, maybe it lasts 40 minutes, you're gonna get people that are demanding your head on a platter. Whereas when you were, whatever age you were at, early adolescence, you'd play that thing for hours, right? And if you might not have even been good enough to see the end. I didn't see the end most of the games that I played when I was a kid. So I think that's both a constraint of the technology rather than an intent, and I think it was a product of the time. But like, yeah, I think if you're making a game and you get a chance to do a manual, do it. Load it up with story. I'll buy it. Wait. Yes. Did you?
Yeah, me? Sure. Since I'm always full of questions. I forgot the last game. So, have you also played the inspiration of Inside Another World?
Is that the title?
That is the title, Another World.
Title. The inspiration of the Inside.
Another World is the title.
Okay. I'm sorry. Yes. I was like, wait a minute. No, I've never heard of the inspiration of the Inside of Another World. Another World, the Eric Chai game from the like early '90s. It was rotoscoped.
Yeah.
You were like, yeah. I played that a long. Again, my parents were okay with PC games, but not consoles for some weird reason. So I did play that around the same time. It was sort of coeval with Prince of Persia, and yeah, like that's one that I think part of it's probably constrained because again, early PCs. I think I played that on like a 2 or 386. It was early days of like microcomputer PC gaming. But I also feel like that had a lot more intention behind the sparseness of the narrative. Like, we're going to drop you in this weird space and sort of let you wander around, and again, it sort of plays on that. It's a side scroller, so you're compelled to explore just to figure out what's at the end of the screen. And it turns out that it's weird gorilla people and laser beams and a lot of dying. So I think yeah, and they re-released that one too. It's still good. It's still really hard. It's actually unforgivably hard. But
Has very awkward controls.
it does. But you know what? Again, I think the other thing is that a lot of these games hold up really well like 10, 15, 20 years later. You can chalk some of that up to just good art direction. Or Crash Bandicoot, the original, not the re-release, but everything's getting re-released.
The
PS1
Crash Bandicoot re-release was in fact developed here locally.
Was it really?
Yeah,
By who?
by Vicarious Visions.
Oh, I think I did know that actually. Yeah, that's cool. Still, I mean, and I don't mean to. I'm not saying I'm not trying to write the re-release off. I'm just like I had the original PlayStation version and I fired it up fairly recently. It's jagged, but still holds up pretty well. It's just like you get a good, strong art direction that is not super focused on, I'm just gonna say shaders, because those are gonna be out of date in like the next console cycle. If you're lucky.
Whoa, what are we doing?
I'm trying.
All the quotes.
Yeah. It's out of short story. For sale, bigger shoots for sale, no more. Yeah. That's a pretty efficient. Like the other thing that I turn to a lot in terms of really building an entire world, an emotional setting, is traditional Japanese haiku, which is not necessarily the rigid 575. Again, it tends to be like focused on the natural world, on our place, our small place within it. And then, like, there's one, it's a Matsuo Basho, and I'm not going to get it exactly, but the gist of it is the first rains of spring, even the monkey wishes he had a little cut of straw. And I just love that image of like this miserable looking wet monkey in a tree as like this cold rain hits him. It's just like, and you can see a little raincoat. And they're like, oh wow, that was, okay, I got a lot out of that in just a very short chunk of words. It's not going to fit every game, but it's definitely, I think, if it is something that you've decided that you want to do, it's a good model to look at. Cool. Thank you all for through the round.
Thank you.